E-commerce Straight Talk. This week, we're talking to Colin Giblin about all things e-commerce and everything that's been going on in industry and news and updates and what's been happening, especially here in this crazy time in 2021. So Colin, you're over at Turtle Fur, correct?
That I am.
And how have things been treating you this year so far?
Oh, this year's been a little stranger than last, even, I guess I would say. Turtle Fur is headwear and accessories company. So last year was quite successful for us, being in the face covering market already. There was a lot of demand for our product. That's slowed down a lot this summer, but I think people are just getting back out in the world and shifting where their spending is as well. So.
Yeah, I think we've noticed that across the board. It's very interesting because you have two big things coming in, right? You have this iOS Apple Play that's been going on and them pushing this privacy rules, right? And then you also have purchase patterns and behaviors, which have just sort of fluctuated a lot this summer. Well, of course, they've been fluctuating since the beginning of the pandemic, so it's been nuts. But I think everyone's been focused on traveling and getting out of the house. And I mean, even for myself, we can't even find a spot either at the beach or in campground until like October, which is the craziest I've heard of,
Yeah, I mean, between spending on travels, getting back out to bars and restaurants, I think people are still looking at big ticket purchases as well, particularly for our product and kind of a $17 average price point. They can get to that later, can be an impulse buy, but they're really looking at those used car purchases and houses still. So yeah. Electronics, I just heard, was way up for the month of June on a podcast this morning, listening on my drive into work. It sounds like people are still spending the savings they've built up over the last year.
Well, and even now, like this week in particular, with the latest, and I know very little about this. I don't know if it's a new law or whatever, but you have the child tax credit kickback, whatever. It's like $250 if you have one kid over 6, for $300 or $350 if it's a kid under 6, monthly now until all the way through December.
Yeah,
and so we literally for a lot of those brands who their customers are, live paycheck to paycheck. We saw an incredible, a lot of purchases come through in the past like 3 days, which is insane. But we normally see those trends around paydays, around tax time, right? And towards the end of the year as well, Q4. So it's interesting to sort of see these small little patterns still sort of happen. But I think you're right. Looking at these, these bigger ticket items, especially now that people are trying to buy homes, but they can't get in the homes, right? So they have cash just burning in their pocket, and this is how humans operate, right? We're just waiting to spend it. So yeah, it's and what's even more incredible is looking at this year in particular, because last year, back to school. So July, August is normally pretty big, second biggest time of the year. And last year, I think retail lost like 60% of overall revenue. Granted, it's not like there was less money spent. It was just everything was spent on Amazon and on Walmart, right?
Right.
Due to the nature of what 2020 was. So this year we can already see like record spends start to break out because of the simple fact that they're trying to make up for lost revenue, right? And
yeah, I was reading something the other day that was talking about the kind of the impulse buy shift rather than the plan ahead, particularly with back to school, because as school started reopening in kind of the second half of the school year, early 2021, those back to school purchases started spiking up because they needed them right then and there, and they couldn't have planned it further ahead. And that's kind of carried through into some other things. It sounds like there's less looking out 6 months on the calendar going, okay, what do I need for the fall? What do I need today?
Yeah.
This week.
And what makes it even worse, sort of, add insult to injury, is inventory issues across the board. I mean, just the delay.
Absolutely.
And so we had brands that we were working with that we had to order inventory back in Q1, projecting for Q3 and even Q4, because like some brands still haven't even got their inventory yet, and they won't get it till September. And so it's like, Lord, so you're trying to make these projections in a time in which all of your predictions are just throw them out the window, right? And so,
Absolutely.
it's a very interesting world to be living in right now, especially in the world of e-commerce. It's so unpredictable, but chaos does make it a little bit more entertaining, a little more fun, right? And now, taking this and sort of segueing it into Amazon. So how has Amazon been treating you guys over the past year or so?
Well, so it's what we found interesting through the pandemic actually was our Amazon business didn't pick up. And maybe things picked up in certain categories on Amazon, but we saw more consumers coming direct to our .com site, our turtlefur.com site, and making purchases with us rather than going through Amazon. I think some of that was the early 2020 fulfillment issues that Amazon had. Delays in getting stuff into their FBA centers, and then actually delays in getting it out to the consumers because they were prioritizing certain categories. And that pushed some consumers to change habits for a little while. But I think the other piece of it was throughout the pandemic, we saw so many conversations around, support small business. Small businesses are struggling, and we're not a particularly large brand. So I think we saw some of that shift of people going direct to brand rather than going to big box for non-commodity-esque things. So, Amazon wise stayed flat for the last year for us, which was kind of refreshing change, I'll call it.
No, yeah, it's that makes me a little happy on the inside. It was sort of like, this whole thing happened. It was like March, things start picking up. Everyone was sort of in it together, right? March of 2020. And then April came and everyone was like, starting to pull apart. But the craziest part is that Amazon was still running full steam. Walmart, all the big box stores. That was very frustrating and irritating that was allowed. And, your smaller mom and pops just got destroyed because of it. They're already getting hammered. And yet it's like icing on the cake. And then Amazon, I don't even know what their market share is now. Even pre-pandemic, their market share was almost 50%. And so and even to look at it now, you have 7 companies that control 51% of the total market, not just retail and e-commerce, like the total market. And Amazon's in that group. And I think people, if they have a choice, they would rather not buy from Amazon. I think by now everyone sort of knows, like, Amazon's not the greatest, right? It's like, it's convenient, which that's why they're so successful.
Absolutely. I think it's people go looking at Amazon for commodity items. It's the same reason you used to go to Walmart, or you still go to Walmart, is I got to buy toilet paper, I got to buy dish soap, I got to buy cereal. It's easy. You know what you can get, it's reliable, and you get it quickly. But I do think people started looking around for more interesting things last year, either between stimulus checks, giving them a little bit extra spending cash, and having a little bit more time to look at buying things rather than experiences. They started poking around at different smaller retailers. So that was a nice change.
Yeah, and it's what we just saw the stats come out last month. It was Amazon has a turnover rate for their employees, turnover rate of 150%. So that means for every 10 people they hire, they're losing 15. And it's so interesting to hear that their executives had to have this conversation about how long before we've gone through the entire pool of people that we could employ, right? Because at that rate, you're looking across the country, right? How many fulfillment centers and warehouses and all this stuff, and not only that, but then the pool of people who are willing to work for Amazon or at Amazon, right? And it's
really puts it in perspective just how large of an organization they are when you're talking about a country of how many hundreds of millions live in the US, and they're worried about using everyone.
Yeah.
at some
Yeah, no,
point.
it's crazy. And granted, they are working hard on automation, right? And in all actuality, automation does displace workers. It's the nature of it, right? It's sort of these fluctuations in culture that we see ever since the 1800s and industrialization. It's sort of, that's just sort of how it goes. But I think when these things start to happen, you have Bezos stepping down, right? Because he wants to go to the Mars or the moon or whatever now, right? And do his compete with other billionaires. I think what this does is it starts to leave Amazon open, right? And they lose a tiny bit of leverage, not enough, tiny, because they still employ more lobbyists than there are politicians in Washington, right? So it's
Right.
but it's, if you go back 100 years, right, in the early 1900s, you have the great A&P company, right? They were crushing it. They're basically a semblance of what Amazon is, right? And then they had their catalog, and because that's how everyone worked back then. And through the 20s, they started shifting more to white labeling products, because they same thing the Amazon's doing, right? Where they see, hey, these products are selling really well, we can just call them Amazon Basics or whatever, start white labeling. And then that's how they sort of take over and monopolize the market. And that's when the government came after them and basically completely disbanded and destroyed them. Will that happen to Amazon? I'm not too sure. I think politics.
I did see a bill brought to the state Senate, I think, in Washington, about trying to break up FBA from Amazon this past week, because of the kind of the nature of it factoring into the buy box algorithm, right? And how that backs sellers into a corner of needing to leverage this additional cost program and then not having a choice to choose a lower cost option for fulfillment, potentially, and optimize their own margins because of that need to do this to win. I don't know that that'll get anywhere. It's not the first time we've seen someone make an attempt to split off a piece of Amazon's business, but I saw something a while back that Bezos himself said, most big businesses only make it 30 years before there's a major disruption, and then they've passed their peak. Maybe they stick around, maybe they come back, but Amazon is at that age.
Yeah.
Maybe it's about to happen. We're just starting to see the chips happening. Could be.
Yeah, and well, I definitely see them having to break up their white label versus the rest of the marketplace. I think that there's some bill that tried to get passed through, but it got shut down about a year ago, something along those lines. So what you can see is sort of like, I think with politicians, they put feelers in the water, and this is how they do it. Like the bill might get shot down, but it's just sort of like, how's everyone feeling? But it's yeah, I think, especially with Bezos stepping down, I think that's sort of like one of the indicators there. He's just like, I just don't want to have anything to do with this anymore. Like this is just getting to a point where I would rather focus. What was it? Blue Origin? Is that his space company?
I think that's what his is called. Yeah.
Yeah. And he was like, what is it? By the end of July 31st, I'm going to go to space. And then Branson came out like a week later and was like, I'm going the 14th or whatever it was. It's just like billionaires fighting against each other to go to space. Yeah. It's, it's very fascinating to sort of watch that occur and sort of live in this time too. And me being a total like sci-fi nerd and space nerd, I'm hoping like, yeah, let's keep this space thing going, man. Do I want to go to Mars? No, but like it would be cool if someone did.
But why not? I mean, just to have that experience would be pretty cool. I'm just waiting for the cost to come down a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I think the biggest thing with going to Mars is it's a one-way trip, right? He ain't coming back. And so it's like, I don't know if I'm prepared for that adventure. Maybe if they had oxygen, and some
there you go. Yeah.
I could do that, but to live in like, basically create your own prison over there and then be like, try to survive. I just don't know if I'm not the guy for the job. But yeah, looking at what's been occurring this year, I know with a lot of our clients, we're starting to like try to build out projections is sort of what we do. It's really hasn't helped us much. Last year, Q4, we were able to build out some decent projections, but the rest of the year was just shit, right? It was just garbage. But for, looking at the rest of Q3, since how we just got into it, and then moving into Q4, do you see any trends or anything sort of pushing one way or the other that you guys are looking to jump on?
So with our business, it's a little strange. We don't run on a calendar year, so I'm still sitting here in the kind of early Q2 for my world, because we're so heavily seasonal. We haven't really seen anything showing itself as what the winter and holiday shopping season is going to look like, because that's really where we live, is that November, December, January timeframe. We're still seeing strong participation in outdoor activities, which is a good indicator for our business. Looking at what people are doing with their free time and the travel that they're still doing is great for us. In terms of, e-com trends, one of the things we're watching right now is rising costs in terms of average cost per click on our paid search ads and our Amazon sponsored products, and watching that cost per acquisition creep up over the last 4 or 5 months, wondering what that's going to look like in Q3, Q4, when it's historically higher anyways, right? And kind of wondering, what else do we add to the mix to help improve the performance of those ads, as well as that retention rate for consumers overall, so to maximize that lifetime value.
Yeah, it's I mean, if we look at what happened last year, right? We tried to make comparisons to what, previous 3 to 4 years before that, trying to look at seasonality and trends and whatnot. And then obviously last year, it was interesting to see, Q4 holiday sales with a lot of companies. It seems like the norm now is starting November 1st, right? The day after Halloween, it's like sales go. I mean, Walmart did this with like every couple of days was a new sale on a specific kind of item. But it worked for them. But we were starting to see that sort of come into play the years prior, where it was like, instead of just that week of Black Friday, Thanksgiving, Cyber Monday, it sort of started creeping in the week before, and then the week before that, and now it's like November 1st is sort of like the date, right? And we've seen big box do this forever, because the day after Halloween, you go into your local Kroger, Fred Meyer, Costco, whatever. It's like all holiday. It's now Christmas-esque time, and it's like everything's just been removed for Halloween and replaced overnight. And so it's going to be interesting to see it this year, especially with like what you said. We have these rising costs across the board. I mean, we've seen, with our advertising, we've seen CPMs still going up, even though, we've sort of had conversations with other brands and other agencies, and it's not like people are spending more, right?
Right.
And so it's like, well, where is this increased CPM coming from? Why are we paying more for this? And I think there's so many different factors to put in there, but I do have sort of a conspiracy theory here. And so let me run this by you. So you have the whole iOS debacle, right? Where it's like Apple's like, we're all about privacy, and they market it as we're trying to protect you, like we're all this privacy, when really in my mind, all it is a data grab. They see that all this data is being controlled by all these different platforms, and they're like, we can control it because we're the source, right? At least for Apple users and iOS users. So they start out by blocking tracking, doing all these things, starting with the advertising and moving into email and moving into all things, right? At some point, they're going to need to do something with that data. And they know it's worth more than gold, more than oil. So what are they going to do? And I know that they've been pushing hard on Apple search ads, but really it's just through the App Store. You can already tell that they've been doing beta testing with different through Safari and different platforms like that, where they're doing search ads. My theory is that CPMs have been going up because they did make a deal with Facebook in particular that they would start passing on opt-out data. So those people who have opted out of tracking through the iOS 14.6. So now if, for all those listening, if you go to Facebook and you go to your business manager and you go to events manager and you look at your aggregated events management or measurement, you'll see like if you put like your primary conversion is like purchase, you'll see that number. That number is now your number of opt-outs who have purchased. So Apple is now passing on data back to Facebook. And my theory is this is sort of like their beta test with sending the, what Facebook used to use back to Facebook, but at a cost. And that cost comes back on us as rising CPMs, even though people aren't spending as much. So that's my theory. And now if it does hold true, someone will leak this at some point in time. But just for right now, it makes me kind of feel good because we live in this conspiracy, like 2020, 2021 is like conspiracies galore, right? But as far as like trends for like this near future, like in July and August, what are you guys expecting to see in the outdoor industry and movement and purchases?
Yeah. So for us, we're expecting a really strong winter again. Part of it, I think, is going to still come from some face covering sales in the parts of the country that are still seeing rising COVID cases, and maybe some shifts in regulations from local governments or ski resorts as the winter draws nearer and kind of when they roll out their policies. But with such a large spike in outdoor participation last year, one of the things I've kind of been watching with that is so many people started taking to new hobbies. Bikes were impossible to buy. Kayaks were being sold out left and right. More people were getting out hiking. And, had this pandemic only lasted 2 or 3 months, or the 2 weeks we all thought it was going to be back in March of 2020.
Yeah.
Those habits, they would have spiked and everyone would have returned to the way life used to be. But to go 12 to 15 months, depending on what part of the country you were in, with this new way of living, much like work has changed for everyone to either fully remote now or hybrid models as we move back into the office. I think a lot of habits have shifted for people to really be driving more people to engage in outdoor activities, whether it's just getting out for a hike more often or more ambitious endeavors. I think participation has permanently risen, not to the levels we saw last year. There's always going to be some attrition. Higher participations, we're looking forward to that.
Yeah, and you brought up an interesting point, sort of segueing into like employees and dealing with what's going on now, because obviously there's this huge sort of pushback on going back to the office. And for us, we're fully remote, but we did have an office. However, it was like we had to renew our lease in March of 2020, and I was like, I think I'm just gonna wait. So glad I did. But now you're having this push to go back to the office. Now, me personally, I get it, because with an office, I can leave business at the office, right? It doesn't come home with me, right? My work doesn't come home with me. I can leave it there. All the stress and all the issues I can leave there. But at the same time, I do completely understand why people want to work remote. And so it's interesting to see like this push for a lot of, especially these bigger corporations, to get people back in the office. And, I don't know the full purpose behind that, but for you guys, are you guys going back fully to the office? Are you guys working a lot remote, or sort of hybrid model?
So we've got a hybrid model. We're in northern Vermont, fairly rural area, small town. So we had a lot of people that were still coming in throughout the pandemic. Internet access isn't always a thing at everyone's home, or not at the level that you need to do your job fully. So we've got most people back in the office, but we've also had people that were remote before the pandemic and doing a hybrid model. Myself, I was remote for 5 years. The last 5 years would work from home and then travel to Vermont, work from the office for a week or so. So we're going to maintain that hybrid model and allow employees to be flexible. We've got up here, you might have a commute that's an hour of driving without traffic.
Yeah.
So it's, you're not sitting in, oh, it's 10 miles from point A to point B, and it's bumper to bumper, so it takes forever. You're moving the whole time at 50 miles an hour, but it still takes an hour because you're that far away. So doing that 5 days a week is tough. So giving employees that benefit to, they want to work 3 days a week in the office and 2 at home, or 2 in the office, 3 at home. That's going to be how we move forward. I think it's going to have a lot of benefits, not just in employee happiness and productivity, but I think it's going to help us find more employees in the long run as well, to have that flexibility as an option.
Well, I've always found that if you're recruiting and hiring is on point, you're hiring adults and you're hiring people that fit the work and the lifestyle that you need for your company and your culture. And for the most part, if you treat them like adults and get out of their way, like, things run very
Absolutely.
smoothly, right? And
Yep.
it's so interesting to see how that doesn't vibe well with corporate America, when at the same time, I was in the military, which you could say was one of them, they employ over 1 million people. And yet that's a lot of times that's how we treated everyone. Granted, not at first. When you're private, you don't get treated like that. But as you get going, like, that's pretty much you're an adult, you know the job, you know the drill, like, just do it. We'll get out of your way and let you handle it. Right.
Yeah. And
And
I think one of the reasons you see a push for bringing people back into the office, though, is there is a difference in the communication that happens. I found that over the last year, without any FaceTime in the office, and being 100% remote, um, your day becomes very full of meetings.
mhm.
And what really could have been a 5-minute pop your head into someone's office, ask a quick question, and go back to your desk, um, turned into a 30-minute block on your calendar pretty often. Um, so having that mix where you can still have those quick touch base conversations in person, or the passing each other in the hallway and remembering something, that the physical triggers to the to-do list, that the informal to-do list of everyone's jobs, right, is has a lot of benefit. We're social creatures. That stuff is real. It's helpful. Um, so while there's a lot of benefit to remote, and you can certainly kind of leave people to do their job and expect them, here's the task, you know what you need to do, you'll get it done no matter where you are. There's a creativity element to in person.
Yeah, and I think that sort of adds to what what culture is, right, in the workplace, right?
Yeah,
It's sort of this term that has been thrown around loosely, right? It's not. I do believe culture, quote unquote culture, has been added to the corporate jargon, right? Of like, what does that mean? Um, but I think that sort of nails it on the head. And I have another theory. We have a lot more people acting out now. Everyone's back out in in society and running around and doing things and going on vacations. But you see a lot more, and maybe it's just the because people have video now and they're videotaping everything, and TikTok exists. But you see a lot more people acting out on planes, or acting out in a store or anything like that, right? Sort of throwing hissy fits and whatnot. And my thought was, I wonder if that has to do with not being in the office anymore, because when you are in the office, you have to work and vibe well with others. It's just how it is. Like, they may not agree on the same things. You don't even talk politics. Like, you don't do that. You don't touch it. There's certain things that you just wouldn't do. But after a year of not having to do that, and everyone's sort of in their own echo chambers, and just hearing themselves talking, what they, all the biases that come along with that and everything that they wanted to hear, that has sort of driven this division and how people are acting towards one another, even though they shouldn't be, right? And so, yeah, I do think there's so much that is important with going to the office, but I do think it totally depends on you, your brand, your employees, everything that's happening. And obviously I'm, like I said, me personally, I like having an office to go to. On top of that, I feel like I do way more work when I'm remote because there's always something to do, right? And if your computer and your laptop and your desk are right there, you just like, oh, I got to do this, right? And then pretty soon it's 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock at night. You're like, what am I doing? I got stuff, I got other things to do. You know, I got a family to tend to, I got dinner to make. But going back to what we were talking about previously, when we talked about, you know, rising costs for this year and sort of acquisition costs. What have been some of the bigger challenges that you guys have been facing so far in 2021?
Yeah, so particularly for us, you know, as I mentioned earlier, we've been in the face covering business since 1982. It's what we do. And well, everyone else got into that business last year, and people bought like crazy from anyone they could find and any piece of product they could get their hands on. And now there's a lot of people sitting on excess inventory. So particularly in the Amazon marketplace, we're seeing a lot of names that didn't exist 18 months ago and won't exist in 12 months. And they're at bottom of the barrel pricing. It's not particularly great product in the first place. So yeah, I can understand how it's so cheap. But cutting through that noise in the Amazon marketplace is difficult for an established brand to then rank well against all of those lower price points, right? Telling a quality story in the Amazon marketplace isn't really what it's there for. It's price and availability. That's the tenets of the entirety of their assortment. So that's one of the bigger challenges we've been facing, is increased competition in our particular market.
Interesting. Yeah, I remember this whole thing kicked off last year, and you know, we do a lot of advertising on social media, and it was like, I think it was like May and June and July of last year. I don't know how many mask.com and, you know, whatever it is, .com, add a mask in there, companies hit us up. And we would always get in these conversations like, oh, how long have you know, been in business for? Oh, you know, a month, 2 weeks.
Exactly.
Just started. And it's like, you know, these guys, maybe they work in the corporate world or whatever, got together, they went and spent $100 grand on masks somehow. And then they're like, oh, this will be easy, we'll just offload it on Facebook. And it's like, well, you know, Facebook, they have regulations against that right now, right? This is before they sort of opened it up, like you can't, right? And so everyone was trying so many different ways to get around this. And it's going to be interesting, especially with inventory overhead, right? Moving into towards the end of the year, when you have the tax that has to come along with this. Like, what are they going to do? They got to dump it somewhere, right? Or maybe they just put it in a warehouse and the warehouse accidentally burns down. I don't know. So it's the fuel for this mask push. And on top of that, these weren't even like medical grade anything. It was just like you saw bikini companies take bikinis and make masks out of them and all this stuff. And maybe that works for some people. It was I don't know. The whole thing was just odd. And you could tell people that were just trying to jump on the bandwagon. It was kind of annoying in my perspective anyways. But go ahead.
It certainly became a crowded market very quickly. Yes.
Yeah. So if you could give, I guess, one piece of advice or something for, you know, our listeners to take home with them today and implement, what would that be? Do you have anything?
That's a awfully broad question. Just one piece of advice on anything.
I'm just dropping it on you. Well, let's keep it retail e-commerce related.
Yeah. Well, I was going to stay in that lane anyways. I wasn't just going to, here's some good life advice.
Yeah. Don't squat with your spurs on. Yeah. Don't pee upwind. Yeah.
It's hard to narrow that down to just one good little nugget for for everyone, but I guess one of the things that's been top of mind for us lately um, has been we just redesigned our website and it went live about a month ago, and going through that, really trying to focus in on making a good user experience for all users, not just who, you sit there and you look at your website as yourself, as a brand owner, as a e-com manager or director, and no, I like this. It's great. Well, you do this every day, all day. How does the average person see it? Or how does a population that uses a computer in a different way see it? An older population that doesn't have the tech familiarity, population that blind population that isn't using the visuals that you've spent so much time poring over. Don't just stand up a standard site with the easiest theme you can find. It's your face to the world. Put some time and effort into it and make sure it's a quality experience for as many people as possible. And that's something we try and do. And every time we find out we need to tweak it more, we do. So you'll never get it perfect, but it's worth putting that time in. It's the 21st century brick and mortar shop. You wouldn't just stand up a warehouse, throw some shelving in it, and call your store done. Don't do that with a website either.
Yeah, no, that's interesting you bring that up. I think it goes to the epitome of marketers ruin everything, but at the same time, it's this idea that we get so trapped in our own world, right? It's we really only see what's in front of us, and yeah, it's I think if there's like the one tenet that you just touched on, that sort of is the underlying tenet for all things business wise, is like you really need to understand your customer.
Absolutely.
And so many people, I don't want to say take it for granted because that's not the right word. It's like they think they know, right?
Yeah.
And we, as business owners, it's easy to get trapped in that, especially because a lot of us are type A. A lot of us in management and business, it's like that's just the nature of it. Like I got this figured out, right? Or you just don't want to deal with it. But the issue is we have to be able to take a step back from that. Do a survey, talk to people. Like even literally, you can have one-on-one conversations with your customers and ask them questions and talk about it. So it's very interesting that, and I think this goes to why, what's the like number one Shopify theme? Is it like Turbo or Sandbox or something like that, that like everyone uses? And I think that's the primary example is, it's everyone's just sort of going off what everyone else is doing, and they're not thinking about their own customers and the viability there.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much data in the world that if you're not using it to better understand who your customers are, you may know who you want them to be, but if you're already up and operating, the customers have decided who they are and they're telling you. You can find out, just look at your Google Analytics, or as you said, have conversations with them. I think that's a great thing that is lost a lot in e-commerce. If you ran a brick and mortar shop, you've got customers coming in, you can talk to them and learn more about them. And that's always hard for e-com stores and e-com owners.
Yeah, well, especially because you're trying to move so fast too. But all right, so Colin Giblin over at Turtle Fur, you're the e-commerce director there. So I appreciate your time. Appreciate you taking the time to chat with everyone today. Where can people connect with you at?
Yeah, find me on LinkedIn, Colin Giblin, and over at Turtle Fur, and reach out to me there, or you can chase me down at Turtle Fur itself. Find me on the little bio on the website. So
cool. Well, thanks for taking the time out today, Colin. And it was great talking to you. We'll talk to everyone later. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can stay up to date, and listen to our podcasts on Spotify, Apple, and Google Play. All right, all. Take it easy.